Viewers, it's all underway in the United States. Polling stations are filling up, and it's going to be a long night. Let me tell you that. But viewers, in the end, the Biden-Harris administration has played true to form. In 2020, when they were elected, many analysts who examine American electoral outcomes from an Indian lens said that the India-US relationship enjoys bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. This measure of goodwill across the aisles will mean that India will retain its star valuation under a Biden Democratic presidency. This takeaway was specially trumped up, excuse the pun, because of Biden's Veep's ethnicity. Yes, Kamala Harris's Indian roots. It was assumed will have the quote potential to change Indian engagement with American politics as well as the United States, unquote, as well as responses to issues in India, unquote. But there was also a small minority of Indian analysts that injected a realistic caveat. They said that Biden's pledge in his victory speech to restore the US's, quote, respected leadership on the world stage, unquote, and to, quote, honestly confront the challenge of nations that are backsliding on democracy, unquote, could potentially lead to friction points in Indo-US ties. These realists also felt that these irritants would have ordinarily manifested themselves under Trump, largely because of his isolationist approach to foreign affairs. 4 years later, the motley group of pessimists have been mostly proven right. India-US relations, while on even keel on geostrategic, trade, technological and military matters, have been somewhat thrown off balance by an ideological disconnect. Biden and Harris have both spoken out against what they believe to be our, quote, India's human rights violations, unquote, fueled by policies like the CAA and NRC that are, quote, inconsistent, they've said, with the country's long tradition of secularism and with sustaining a multi-ethnic and multi-religious democracy, unquote. There have also been unflattering mentions in reports prepared by the US State Department of India's alleged, quote, descent into electoral autocracy, unquote. So much so that at least 3 Democrat lawmakers even boycotted Modi's congressional joint address when Prime Minister Modi was accorded the rare honor by President Biden on what was a storied state visit a couple of years ago. Over time, much to Delhi's chagrin, the Biden-Harris administration has privately wagged its finger at India's sanctions-defying, quote, oil diplomacy, unquote, with West designated, quote, rogue state, unquote, Russia, and not so privately at Delhi's adventurism with respect to allegedly taking out Khalistani terrorist and US citizen Gurpant Singh Pannu. The Biden administration is also suspicious of non-West multilateralism, which India has fetishized as an example of its strategic autonomy. This was recently evidenced by the condescending tone adopted by the White House's spokespersons on the just concluded BRICS plus Kazan State Summit. The prospect of an even more liberally inclined, Western values imbued Harris administration wielding power on the back of a decisive mandate would lead to a spell of more moralizing on the international stage. New Delhi's foreign policy managers may never acknowledge it openly, but they must be suitably ambivalent today at the prospect of a Harris presidency. They will, of course, have to sweat it out for another 12 hours before the results are out. If that is, the country votes decisively. Viewers, we have already experienced 4 years of Trump. But Kamala Harris, even though she was vice president, we don't know her as an occupant of the West Wing of the White House, viewers. We don't know her as an individual shaping policy towards India in the Oval Office. We can only guess that she was consulted, but vice presidents usually don't have that remit. Could have been different with Mr. Biden, but viewers, we'd never know unless Mr. Biden writes a tell-all. So Viewers, I'm positing the question, will President Kamala be less moralistic in office, in the Oval Office if she wins, than Biden and she were over the last 4 years, viewers? Let's open this question out. Tim Romer, Foreign American Ambassador to India, is here with us. Harsh Shringla, former Indian Ambassador to the United States. Lisa Curtis, former Senator, is also here with us. Let's open this up for a conversation. We'll also be joined, of course, in just a few minutes by Shalabh Kumar, who is, of course, a Trump advocate. Lisa Curtis, many people will say that, look, even if Harris comes into the Oval Office as a president with a big mandate, there will be continuity. There will be no major disruptions. But as I've pointed out, there are some irritants now in our relationship with the United States, and some of them are sticking up from under the carpet and could actually trip this bonhomie, so to speak. Do you see that intensifying, that glare, that sort of perception that America is big brothering India in some ways on certain issues, ideological issues?
Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to make one correction. I've never been a senator. I actually worked in the Trump administration. I was a deputy assistant to the president and a senior director in the National Security Council during the Trump administration from 2017 to 2021. So I just want to make that correction. But to your question about whether a potential Harris administration, there might be some irritants or friction in the U.S.-India relationship, I think that's entirely possible. Look, by and large, I think the Biden administration has put a lot of effort into building up the U.S.-India relationship. You have the ISET dialogue, the technology dialogue. You have the fact that the Biden administration last year agreed that the U.S. and India would co-produce jet engine technology, which was a major milestone in the relationship. The Quad, of course, has been elevated. The Quad was started or revived in the Trump administration in 2017, and the Biden administration has carried that forward and elevated it. So there has been quite a bit of positive momentum in the U.S.-India relationship. However, there have been a few irritants that you referred to. One is the alleged assassination attempt against Panun, the U.S. citizen on U.S. territory. Also, the differences over Russia. And just recently, we have seen the listing of some Indian companies violating the sanctions policies in terms of providing equipment that facilitates Russia's defense industrial base. So certainly there are some irritants there. I think President Biden had really sought to compartmentalize and put aside some of those differences, of course, allowing the Department of Justice investigations to continue on the Panun case. And of course, the listing of the companies, that's also a process that happens periodically. It's not just Indian companies. There are several companies internationally that have been in violation of the Russian sanctions, kind of allowing that to happen, but at the same time, prioritizing the strategic partnership, the U.S.-India strategic partnership, and making sure that moves forward. And so I think it remains to be seen what Harris would do if elected, but there certainly are some irritants there that would have to be very carefully managed. So the question is, would she be able to manage these in such a way that insulates the strategic partnership from some of these areas of friction?
So we're essentially talking about compartmentalizing the relationship into different boxes, if you may, Lisa Curtis. Okay, let me just open this up. That's an interesting point of view. Can she actually create these little compartments where you can sort of leverage one over the other, et cetera, but not really disrupt the apple cart, mixing metaphors. But Mr. Shringla, let me bring you in on this. This is important because, look, America will decide in the next 24 hours. We might actually be in for a long week, some people say, but let's say we'll get a fair sense in the next 24 hours which way this election is headed. Mr. Shringla, who will the Modi administration be most comfortable with? Trump is transactional. He may not be, because of his insular sort of outlook, may not be too bothered about India's internal affairs. The Biden-Harris administration has been. I mean, it's talked about Article 370, the abrogation of it, 35A. It's talked about the CAA. You know, I've sort of defined those to you. I know you probably won't wear your exact opinion on your sleeve, but privately you'd admit that we'd be sort of more comfortable with Trump?
So I think all along in terms of our relationship, we have made it a point to work with any administration in the United States. I mean, Prime Minister Modi had a great connect with President Obama. He had a great connect with President Trump. He has a great connect with President Biden, and he knows Vice President Kamala Harris very well. So from that perspective, I think we have made it a point to work with any administration, and that has been reciprocated from the US side because every president has added to the relationship. So the momentum in that relationship has been carried forward by every president contributing substantially to taking that relationship strategically forward. And I think irrespective of who comes into the presidency, and I really mean this, I mean, you may feel that I'm hedging, and it's my diplomatic side of things.
You worn your hat very close to your skull, and you've decided that I'm not going to give this guy even a little bit of encouragement. But look, I have to ask you this, Mr. Shringla, you can't really be serious. I mean, we have a problem where apparently America shared intelligence with Canada. I mean, it clearly hasn't prioritized India in the manner it does Israel, for example, even though India plays a pivotal role in the Asia Pacific. I mean, you've got to be looking at that.
Can I put it in some perspective?
Okay.
See, the Democratic Party has its left liberal side, primarily the progressives, but also, you know, you have the unions and others, and they tend to exercise disproportionate influence on the presidency, whoever is president. Now, President Biden, given all his experience and the respect he enjoys, has made sure that he has kept the relationship above these distractions. I mean, he has made sure that our relationship has been insulated from some of these distractions, and which is why you had many of the achievements that Lisa just referred to, you know, whether it's the Quad or whether it's involving Prime Minister Modi in all of these major conferences that he hosted on democracy, climate change, etc. But it's only towards the end of that presidency that we saw many of the issues that you raised come up. And I would also look at it from the point of view of President Biden's own grip on the administration actually slipping a bit, given his age and the other factors that led him to withdraw from the race. And of course, I would say that you have to give Vice President Kamala Harris the benefit of doubt. There is no doubt that she has been close to that part of the Democratic Party.
I mean, you've had, Mr. Shringla, forgive me for interrupting, 3 Congress people who boycotted the Prime Minister's speech in the House. They didn't show up. It was a state visit. I mean, imagine had that happened in India with some of the opposition leaders or even ruling BJP MPs not showing up for a joint address. Supposing, Obama gave one. Tim Romer knows about that when he came to India. So imagine if that had happened. That's an embarrassing situation for any president to deal with, isn't it?
So President Biden, I think, has tried to steer the relationship away from some of these distractions. I mean, that's important to note. Having said that, you want to know what President Kamala Harris would do if she comes into the White House. And my own sense is that she would come under the same pressures that President Biden came under, but we will have to give her the benefit of doubt. I mean, at the end of the day,
why should we give her the benefit of the doubt?
Once you take that high responsibility, you understand that global strategic partnership that we talk about is very, very critical to the United States. Okay. And once that is established, once you get a very, very firm sense of that relationship and the importance that it enjoys, then you will, I think, take the necessary steps to safeguard the relationship on the distractions. Let us not.
So you suddenly become more pragmatic and less idealistic. Okay, let me bring Mr. Timothy Romer in. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Romer. You've served in India, of course. You know the landscape, but it has significantly changed. You were here, of course, before Modi, the rise of what the American liberal press called the nationalist Hindutva Modi. And there is a degree of disconnect between the democratic view of Mr. Modi and the Republican view, especially under Trump, of Mr. Modi. Will this fault line that we are now seeing sort of creep in to our relationship? And we've also had a situation where when Mr. Modi went to America just about 2 months ago, a whole group of Khalistanis were invited into the White House to hold talks. And that was seen as very jarring optically. So Mr. Romer, do you believe that Kamala Harris will be less of the big brother, so to speak, or America will be less of a big brother under Kamala Harris, and we should give her the benefit of doubt?
Well, first of all, I have to salute my friend, Ambassador Shringla. I see where he gets his diplomatic talent, balancing all your very direct questions at him. He has spent a lot of time in America. He knows our system extremely well. He's been up to Capitol Hill. He knows the Democratic wing and the right wing of the MAGA Republicans. And that requires great diplomacy in our relationship to balance those different wings. Your question, I think, is a very important one. When I was the U.S. ambassador in the Obama administration, it was extremely important for me to not only have a very good relationship with the government, with Prime Minister Singh's party, the Congress coalition, but also with the BJP as the minority party and the opposition party. And whoever the Indian people picked in their elections, whether that was Mr. Modi in subsequent elections, or whether that was a regional party leader in a particular state in India, or whether that was somebody we didn't expect, we were going to put the relationship and its strategic importance front and center to make it work. So whoever the Indian people pick, there is bipartisan support in America. Whether there might be 2 or 3 Democrats out of 435 criticizing the relationship, there are the overwhelming majority of Democrats and Republicans in Congress and in the Senate that want to work out through these irritants and some of these disagreements that, by the way, India has on their side. You know, we have to work through, some of India's independent foreign policy interests, whether that be buying certain Russian defense systems or buying Russian oil. We respect those decisions and need to be able to understand them and work through them, just as India has to do when we disagree with them on a particular issue, whether that be Ukraine, whether that be something in the Middle East. A great relationship managed by great diplomats like Ambassador Shringla know that the relationship between the two countries and our peoples and our values is more important than the individual that we send. Now, both these candidates will have some challenges in the relationship. Mr. Trump is going to bring maybe doubling the tariffs to Indian products, which would hurt their economy, which would hurt their growth rate, which would hurt their inflation rate, which would have significant impact potentially on the people of India. And then you bring up the point that maybe Vice President Harris, if she's elected, is going to emphasize some of the democracy components in the relationship and the human rights, which can be a bit of some kind of irritation to India at times. We will manage these irritants. We will get through these disagreements. That's what great powers do. And that's why the strategic geopolitical relationship, the people-to-people relationship that we have is so much more profoundly important than the individual we might pick from election to election.
Okay, that's very interesting, Mr. Roma. You use the expression, we will manage these irritants, but will we manage them as equals? Because I don't believe, I mean, you've talked about the diplomacy and the diplomatic foreign service corps here in India, but look at Eric Garcetti, the US envoy to India. He's been very, very direct and quite unapologetic in talking about some of these irritants. And they have chafed, let me tell you, the Indian establishment, so much so that there are many people like me who've said that let's talk a little bit about human rights violations, the way minorities are treated in America, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of the heavy lifting to keep this at an even keel has been done really by Indian diplomats who haven't shot their mouth off, but we aren't seeing the reciprocity in America. And I'm only fearing that under Harris, there'd be more of an open season.
Look, when I go to India and somebody in India says to me, your democracy, Ambassador Romer, is not perfect in America, I say, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. How do we make it better? We've made mistakes in the past, whether it's been the treatment of Native American Indians, whether it's been the enslavement of Black people, but our process is an open one. We admit those mistakes. We want to work with great democracies like India and develop that best practices for both our countries to get better at practicing democracy. I don't have a problem when somebody from India brings up a problem that we have in America, nor should the reverse be true. My dear friend, Dr. Jaishankar, will say some things about India having a different strategic interest than the United States. And I respect that because India is from a different part of the world, has different interests, different relationships. We need to then work through and understand how we're coming at these different relationships and not let that divert us from moving forward and deepening the Quad and our interests in disaster assistance and sharing intelligence and security and trying to make for a more peaceful and prosperous world. We're not going to agree on 100% of the issues.
Right.
But this election coming up in America is going to be, who is the better foreign policy leader? Who is the better leader for American economic interests and jobs, particularly in the Midwest? And who is better on the border and reproductive rights?
Okay,
and that's something our people are going to make a decision on today.
Yeah, and we'll perhaps have a verdict. I mean, hopefully. Lisa Curtis made this point about compartmentalizing, and I think Timothy Roma is also kind of talking about that. Mr. Shringla has also sort of said that, look, we've got to focus on the big ticket issues and manage the other irritants. Now, I'm going to go across to somebody who's quite partisan in the Trump camp. Absolutely in the Trump camp, undoubtedly in the Trump camp. And I'm joined by Shalabh Kumar. Mr. Kumar, I've been asking this question. Will a Harris presidency mean more ideological fault lines will open up between US and India, potentially eroding the bonhomie, or will it be business as usual, like some panelists are saying, that we'll get through this?
No, I'm quite concerned about that. If, unfortunately, Kamala becomes the next president of the United States, then it's going to be a significant problem for Modi government, for India, because she is going to take pro-Pakistan, pro-Azad Kashmir stance, and she's going to be pushing for what she normally does, rights of the minorities in Kashmir, and they very quickly forget about Kashmir files as to all what happened to 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits, just in 1990. So that's a concern, and Jammu and Kashmir have now made a significant progress after the repeal of 370 and 35. I mean, you can't even. It's so apparent that in the last 4 or 5 years, the Kashmir has risen up from is like a phoenix from ashes. So the progress
Okay.
is phenomenal, and she's going to try to push back on that progress.
Well, that's a very pessimistic view coming in from the Trump camp here. But I think Mr. Romer made that point that, look, Trump might not fixate on ideological and political issues. He could squeeze India on the trade front. His brand of insular protectionism could hurt India in terms of high-value labor outsourcing and exports and the like. I mean, we could have major disruptions on that end of the spectrum, Mr. Kumar.
Absolutely not. I can tell you that it's on the agenda to have a free trade agreement with Bharat. That's what President Trump wants, and actually that should be the case, because the number one and the number three economies in the world, the two largest democracies, the most powerful democracies, they should be joined at the hip, and that's what's on the agenda. And with respect to immigration, the more restrictions we put on all the people who are illegally crossing the border from the south, 200,000 per month, more than 10 million in the last 4 years under the command of the border czar, Kamala, the better off it is for merit-based immigration in the United States under the leadership of President Trump. President Trump is always for merit, for talent. That's the only thing that should count. Forget about the color of your skin, forget about the race, forget about anything else. He just goes for merit. And a recent program which has been announced by President Trump, that all the graduates of American universities will automatically be qualified for green card. At this point, I myself would probably like to decrease the amount of H-1Bs, because the backlog in that category has gone up to 140 years. I mean, that's really nobody's fault. I don't blame Kamala for that either, or Joe Biden, or Democrats or Republicans, because that's the way the system got set up. 65,000 H-1Bs come here from India every year, and only 7,000 are allowed to become, even though most qualified, only 7,000 are allowed to file for green card. So backlog increases. Now it's over like 1.2, 1.3 million people in that queue, and the wait time is like 140 years.
I understand all of that.
So actually, if anybody would solve that problem, is President Trump.
Okay, Lisa Curtis, let me bring you in. Will Trump be as benign as Mr. Kumar seems to suggest when it comes to protecting American trade interests? He's already, he's made a very direct, and some people felt extremely derogatory statement about India on the trade tariff front, if you might recall.
Yes, I do recall that there were statements by Trump about Indian tariffs. I think, he often made public remarks, or even remarks on his Twitter account about, high Indian tariffs. The one famous one is he accused India of having 100% tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. But I think, we can still see that during Trump's first term, he tried to negotiate a trade deal with India. It didn't really come to fruition, but, I think what we would see in a second Trump term is that if we're talking about tariffs, those are going to be largely focused on China and putting tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States. I think Trump would recognize India as a friend, a good friend, a strategic partner, and that there would be differences in, the kinds of tariffs that he would institute.
Right.
So I think we have to keep that in mind. I think when he talks about tariffs, he is speaking a lot about China. He's talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States. And of course, U.S.-India trade is much smaller than it is with China. So that's one factor to keep in mind. Certainly, Trump is going to focus on trying to, break down trade barriers in India, get access for, U.S. trade, U.S. Companies. That will continue. But does that mean that the U.S. is going to do something very harmful for Indian trade? I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that, there'll be some give and take, but I think the majority of his tariff policy is going to focus on Chinese goods.
Well, I'll leave it at this, viewers, at least in this particular section, because it does appear on balance that we might have continuity, but there will be some disruptions. It just depends on what India is more comfortable in handling. The disruption on the ideological front, or perhaps to some extent, ripples on the trade front. I have a feeling, viewers, that India will be most comfortable, at least the Modi administration will be most comfortable with Trump, because he's not going to really focus very hard on some of the ideological issues that the Modi government is very sensitive about, especially because it gives ammunition to the opposition here in India.